I still keep the letter in the bottom drawer of my desk. 13 years ago, I wrote it with shaking hands and a heart so full of rage it nearly broke me. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Not really. Just a confession of what I knew, what I suspected, what I feared. Back then, I was nobody. A fresh Army veteran just starting over in Charleston. I didn't have a business. I didn't have connections. I had nothing but a cheap apartment and a talent for seeing what others missed. And then came Evelyn. She walked into my world with tailored heels and that Sutton smile, the kind people mistake for charm, but is really just control wearing lipstick. Her family saw me as a temporary thrill, someone to entertain their daughter before she found a man worthy of the name. But Evelyn insisted, said I made her feel real like no one else ever had. I should have known that when people like her feel real, it's only temporary, like taking a vacation from power. We married in a spring ceremony under the oaks, her mother, Judge Margot Sutton, sitting stiff in the front row, her father nodding through a clenched jaw. I thought I'd earned a place at the table. Instead, I'd stepped onto the menu. For years I tried to make it work, built my firm from nothing, took late-night contracts to keep the mortgage paid and the kids in school. Grace and Ethan were my world, the only thing that made coming home feel like more than a transaction. But the shift didn't come suddenly. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't slam doors. She simply rewrote the story in quiet tones behind closed doors until one day the children looked at me like I was just another visitor. I didn't fight then. I waited. I watched. And when her lawyer served me divorce papers at work, wearing a smile like he'd already won, I didn't say a word. I reached into that drawer, took out the envelope I'd sealed 13 years ago. The one thing I'd kept buried, the letter I never sent. The cold started in the little things. Missing socks keys moved from their usual place, silent dinners where only forks made noise. I told myself it was stress. Evelyn had always been intense during new projects, but deep down I knew better. Something was shifting beneath the surface. One Sunday morning I came home early from a consulting trip and found the locks changed. Evelyn opened the door like I was a guest. "You should have called," she said, as if this wasn't my house too. Inside the living room looked curated. Family photos were gone, replaced by abstract art and minimalist decor. On the hallway wall, where our wedding picture used to hang, there was a framed quote, "Sometimes starting over means knowing when to stop holding on." Ethan was building Lego towers alone in the den. Grace sat curled up on the couch, her tablet glowing in the dim light. Neither one looked up when I entered. When I said hi, Grace answered quietly, "Mom says you're sleeping somewhere else now." That night I found my clothes folded in 2 black trash bags placed neatly by the garage door. My office had been locked. Even my books were boxed up. I asked Evelyn if we could talk. She didn't look up from her laptop. "You've always been gone, Miles. This just makes it official." In the stillness of our bedroom, once the warmest space in our lives, I sat on the edge of the stripped mattress and realized I hadn't been pushed out. I'd been quietly replaced. And the worst part, our kids were already adjusting. It happened on a Wednesday. I was reviewing a client's internal breach report when the receptionist buzzed me. "There's a man here to see you, says it's legal." Legal. That was the word that told me everything. He walked in like he owned the place. Polished shoes, silver cufflinks, a briefcase that probably cost more than my office furniture. "Miles Carter?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm Stuart Blakewell," he said, placing a thick envelope on my desk. "On behalf of Evelyn Carter, consider yourself served." I didn't flinch, just nodded. He stayed longer than necessary, looked around my office like he was measuring it for demolition. Then came the smile. "She'll be retaining full custody. Assets are being divided fairly." He leaned in. Your kids don't even want your last name anymore. That one landed harder than I expected. I kept my hands folded. He chuckled as if reading my silence as surrender. I opened a drawer, slowly pulled out a sealed envelope, aged but pristine, and slid it toward him. "What's this?" "Deliver it to your client," I said. He blinked, caught off guard. "Is this some kind of counter-proposal?" "No," I said. "It's insurance." He left without another word, and as the office door closed behind him, I finally exhaled for the first time in months. The game had started, and they had no idea what they were playing. The first call came just after sunset. Evelyn, her voice tight, clipped. "What the hell is this, Miles?" she snapped. "What did you give Stuart? I let it go to voicemail." The second came from a blocked number. Blake, no doubt. I didn't answer that one either. But the third call at 11:47 p.m. was the one I'd been waiting for. "How did you find that letter?" Judge Margot Sutton's voice cracked through the phone. Not composed, not in control, shaken. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. "Good evening, Margot. I was wondering when you'd call." "You bastard. You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, I do," I said. "That envelope contained court records, donation receipts, photographs, enough to end more than your career. You can't prove anything. I can prove everything, including how your campaign coffers grew exactly 3 days after you gave a suspended sentence to the son of your husband's business partner, a man who killed a family of 3. The Morettis wasn't it." The line went quiet. "I want to know what you want," she finally whispered. "I want Evelyn to withdraw the divorce papers. I want full custody of Grace and Ethan. I want Blake gone. And I want your resignation. That's impossible. Then get some sleep while you still have a bench to resign from." I hung up before she could answer. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. My office was quiet again, but I knew the storm had only just begun. 13 years ago, the Suttons buried a secret under layers of privilege, political connections, and silence. They thought it would stay buried. The case file was supposed to be sealed forever, an administrative error they'd called it when it disappeared from public records. But I wasn't looking in public records. I was looking in a forgotten archive of microfilm from a shuttered courthouse in Beaufort County. The Moretti family had been killed instantly, their truck T-boned by a sports car driven by Nicholas Baines, heir to the Baines Holdings fortune and best friend of Gregory Sutton's son. He blew 3 times over the legal limit. Witnesses said he'd been racing another car that night. But Judge Sutton, then a rising star in family court, handed down a suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service. 2 weeks later, Gregory Sutton's real estate company acquired the city contract the Morettis had been competing for. That's where Caleb Monroe came in. He was a junior engineer on the Moretti's bid team. I tracked him down, living in a small house in North Charleston, tending bar at night. He hadn't spoken to anyone about the case in over a decade. When I showed him what I'd found, he didn't cry, just nodded slowly and said they thought no one would remember. They were almost right, I said. Together we cross-checked financial records, timelines, campaign contributions. Caleb still had copies of original bid documents from the Moretti firm, documents that had never made it to city review. They'd been intercepted, buried. Now they were evidence. Evidence that the Sutton legacy, the bench, the hotels, the real estate empire had been built not just on power, but on the quiet death of a family whose only crime was being in the way. They stole justice. I was going to steal back the truth. They'd spent so much time plotting how to erase me, they forgot the 2 people who actually mattered. Grace had always been the quieter twin, thoughtful, a little too serious for 9. Lately, she barely spoke to me at all. Not with anger, just distance, like someone had drawn a line in the sand and told her not to cross it. Ethan still hugged me when we saw each other, but his eyes darted toward Evelyn when he did. He was learning to measure affection like currency, what could be spent, what had to be hidden. One afternoon during my court-approved visit, Grace sat on the floor coloring while Ethan played on the porch. I asked if she wanted to draw together like we used to. She hesitated, then said, "Mom says I shouldn't waste time on things that don't last." I nodded slowly. "What do you think that means?" She didn't answer, just kept coloring. After they left, I cleaned up the living room and found her drawing tucked under the coffee table. It showed a house with 2 windows. In one window, Evelyn and the twins. In the other, a man with no face. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Instead, I opened the bear. It was just a stuffed toy one Grace had carried around since kindergarten, but 2 weeks earlier, I'd sewn a micro camera inside its belly. It wasn't for custody leverage. Not really. It was for the truth. That night, I watched the footage alone in my office. Evelyn's voice was calm but sharp. "Your father's busy again. He had a choice. Remember that." Grace whispered something I couldn't hear. Then Evelyn said, "He left us first. You don't need someone who doesn't show up." Click. Next clip. Ethan asking, "When will Dad live with us again?" Evelyn replied without looking up from her tablet, "When he remembers who his family is." They were rewriting the story in slow daily fragments, but now I had the real version. And I was done letting them forget that these children were mine too. Not everything I kept from the past was a secret. Some things were debts, and I had one friend who still believed in paying them back. Ainsley Ford had been my partner back in military intel long before either of us knew what to do with a peacetime life. She traded her uniform for a badge. I built a business from what we both used to do in the dark. We hadn't spoken in years. She picked up on the first ring. "You only call when something's broken," she said. "What is it this time? Miles a body or a scandal?" "Neither," I said. "But if I'm right, it'll become both." We met the next morning at a diner near the county courthouse. She wore plain clothes but still moved like a cop, sharp, careful, watching every angle. I slid a file across the table. Court records, campaign contributions, a list of contractors who mysteriously folded after bidding against Sutton Properties. She flipped through them slowly. No jokes this time, just a low whistle. "You're trying to take down Margot Sutton. I'm trying to take back my kids." Ainsley nodded. "And if her empire burns along the way," I stirred my coffee, "then maybe Charleston finally gets some fresh air." She leaned back in the booth. "I'll make some calls, quiet ones, but if this blows back on me, it won't. You know how I operate." By that weekend, local reporters started sniffing around an old sealed case involving the Moretti family. The courthouse didn't know who'd leaked it. The mayor's office started asking questions. Whispers spread fast in a town like ours. Meanwhile, I sent an anonymous packet to 3 investigative journalists. Each envelope contained the same story with footnotes and verifiable timelines. Evelyn's name was never mentioned. Not yet. But her mother's was on every page. 2 days later, Evelyn called me. "You think this will fix anything?" she hissed. "You're dragging my family through mud." "No," I said. "They dragged themselves there. I'm just showing the world what's already stained. And I hadn't even started yet." The conference room looked like every other power table I'd ever seen, glass, steel, silence. But this one felt different. It smelled like fear. Evelyn sat at the far end, jaw-tight, eyes dull. Her lawyer, Stuart Blakewell, looked like he hadn't slept in days. Gone was the smugness. In its place, fatigue, resignation. There was no sign of Blake Monroe. His attorney had already advised him to keep his distance. I placed a folder on the table. No threats, no raised voice. "This is what I want," I said. "In writing." Stuart hesitated. "You're asking for everything. I'm asking for what's mine. Full custody of Grace and Ethan. Evelyn keeps her personal belongings a modest trust. Blake transfers his business shares to my holding company. Margot Sutton resigns from the bench, effective immediately. Evelyn didn't look at the documents. You've already humiliated us. What more do you want? The truth. In writing. There was a long pause. Finally, Stewart turned to her. We don't have leverage, Evelyn. He has evidence, federal eyes, and public sentiment. You sign now, or we all go down together. She didn't cry. Evelyn never cried in front of witnesses, but I saw her hands tremble as she picked up the pen. Page after page. Her signature looked smaller than I remembered. Halfway through, she whispered, You're destroying a family. I leaned forward. You already did. I'm just rebuilding what's left. When the last page was signed, I gathered my copies. I want to hear you say it, I said quietly. She looked up, confused. Say what? That you never loved me, that this was all strategy, that you planned to erase me from our children's lives. Her lips curled just slightly. You were never good enough for me, Miles. My mother said it. I just took too long to believe her. I stood, and yet this nobody just took everything back. I turned to leave, but paused. There's one more thing you should know, I said, sliding a photo across the table. It showed Blake Monroe boarding a plane, his arm wrapped around a brunette Evelyn didn't recognize. This is Miranda Walsh, I added. They've been together 6 months. While you were rewriting the future, he was already writing his own with her. The room went silent, and for the first time since this all began, Evelyn had nothing left to say. The papers were signed. The headlines were fading. The attorneys had moved on to their next high billable disasters, but Evelyn wasn't done, not in her mind. She showed up outside the kids' school one afternoon just beyond the car line. Not close enough to violate the agreement, but close enough to make a point. Grace saw her first. She waved. Ethan hesitated. Is Mom allowed to be here? I didn't answer. Just kept my eyes forward. That night I got the message. Not from her, from Stewart. She wants to talk, he said. No lawyers, just 5 minutes. We met in a park near the water just after sunset. Evelyn stood under the old oak tree in a gray coat and that same expensive sadness she always wore when she didn't get her way. I didn't expect it to end like this, she said quietly. You planned every detail, I replied. You just didn't plan on being outmaneuvered. She nodded. Maybe. Maybe I underestimated you. But you underestimated what this did to me, too. I didn't argue. I let the silence hold her words. Then she said it. I want to try again with the kids. Just visitation. Something supervised. I'm not asking to undo anything. Just something. I studied her. Not out of bitterness. Out of clarity. You told them I left, I said. That I chose work over them. You made them question who loved them. I was angry, she whispered. You were strategic, I corrected. She looked down. So that's it? No, I said. You get a goodbye. I handed her an envelope. Inside was a drawing Grace had made just last week. It showed the three of us, me, Grace, Ethan, standing under a bright sun. Evelyn was in the corner. A dotted line traced around her like someone fading out of the page. She still draws you, I said. But not in the center anymore. Evelyn's hand shook slightly as she held the picture. Tell them I'm sorry, I'll tell them the truth, I said, and someday they'll decide what to do with it. Then I turned and walked away. She didn't follow. 3 months later, the house was quieter, but not empty. Grace was learning to play piano. Ethan had picked up my old camera and was obsessed with photographing squirrels in the backyard. Their laughter filled the space that used to echo with tension. They never asked where Evelyn went. Not directly. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They'd pieced it together in their own way, through whispers, at school, changed routines, and the simple math of who shows up every day. Judge Margot Sutton had stepped down quietly under health reasons, but the Department of Justice didn't care about excuses. They cared about sealed court records and campaign funds. Her sentencing was scheduled for spring. Gregory Sutton's hotel empire was under investigation for financial irregularities tied to city contracts. Half his properties were frozen. His lawyers were working overtime. The rest of us weren't. As for Evelyn, the last I heard she was working at a mid-tier real estate agency in Asheville. Not disgraced, but certainly forgotten. Just another woman with a nice coat and a resume no one asked too many questions about. Blake Monroe never came back. He wired his final assets into an account he never controlled. Thanks to my associates, everything he thought he'd hidden was reclaimed. Some of it went to the Moretti family's surviving relatives. Some of it funded a small scholarship in the name of the child who never got to finish school because of him. The rest, I built something new. Carter and Ford investigations opened with a single purpose: to help the people who couldn't afford justice but damn well deserved it. Ainsley and I work out of a modest office downtown. Nothing flashy, but efficient. People walk in broken. They leave prepared. That's what we do now. That afternoon I sat at my desk watching Grace through the window. She was teaching Ethan to ride his bike without training wheels. He kept tipping over. She kept cheering anyway. The phone rang. Carter and Ford, I answered. A woman's voice tight with fear. "My name is Rachel. I think my brother-in-law is stealing from my sister and hiding the kids." I grabbed a pen. "Start from the beginning, Rachel. Tell me everything." Outside, Ethan finally found his balance. Grace clapped as he rode forward, wobbly but determined. Not perfect, but moving on. So was I, because justice wasn't just something I fought for once. It's something I wake up ready to fight for every single day.